Hey everybody, welcome back here to Off the Top Rope here on the Off the Mic Sports Network. So, All In Texas is Saturday. I will have a preview show. There's a lot of stuff going on this weekend. I'll have previews and stuff like this. WWE really just overplayed their hand and they're going to make a ton of money off of this, but it just really drowned out the market in terms of wrestling content, and it's made it really hard to just keep things. I'll try to keep myself like in the loop as much, but it's gonna be exhausting this weekend. But I wanted to talk about one of the matches that I've spent a lot of time, specifically in the build up to All In Texas. Is one of the I'll call it the big four, the four big matches. Obviously, you have the two major championship matches for the men. You've got Okada and Omega for that unified championship, which, by the way, there's a whole bunch of clarifications on that just make no sense. And I think they didn't need to, make that heavily stipulated. And then you've obviously got the Texas Death Match for the World Championship between Hangman Page and Jon Moxley. You've also got the tag team match with the heavily stipulated and high stakes match between Swerve Strickland and Will Ospreay taking on the Young Bucks. If the Bucks lose, they lose their EVP ship, and if Swerve and Ospreay lose, they lose the right to challenge for the world title for 1 calendar year, which is to me, that's one of the matches I'm most looking forward to on this show. And then obviously there's Mercedes Mone and Toni Storm. One of the big, in terms of marquee, in terms of name value, this is one of the biggest women's matches of all time. Because Toni Storm is as big of a star, and she's self-made herself really in AEW. Mercedes Mone, as critical as I've been of her, is one of the best women's superstars ever. Like, you can, her character may be cringe or whatever, but as a wrestler from bell to bell, there's almost nobody better than her. So this is going to be an unbelievable match. And everybody seems to think that I'm hoping that I hope for Mercedes to lose. This is going to shock you guys, surprise you. I think the best option and what I am hoping for to happen, granted, it is the best of two bad options, because one thing I have been consistent about is this match shouldn't have happened. This was the wrong decision. They forced this match. Apparently, this was a plan for Tony Khan for a year, that he wanted to get these two in the same ring, which is ridiculous, by the way, because Mercedes is holding another championship that she's not even defending in this match. So there's really two bad options going into this. Mercedes wins and she holds 75 belts, or Toni Storm wins and she just retains the championship. Here's my thing. Some people have gotten at me in some of the comments and, have talked to me on social media. They were like, Toni should win the match. Toni should win the match. Because then and Mike, why are you so adamant for Mercedes? You might ask me. Well, here's the thing. If you're going to go all in, which, hey, that's the theme of this pay-per-view, and you've given all of these wins to Mercedes Mone and all of these championships, why would you have Mercedes Mone lose now to a superstar like Toni Storm that does not need the rub? I liken this almost to like Brock Lesnar beating The Undertaker at WrestleMania 30. Because let's be real. Did it launch Brock Lesnar into more of a beast mode today? And, obviously he went on that tear, beat John Cena, was a champion, did all these things. We knew who Brock Lesnar was. I think it would have been much better served if you used that as a launching pad for somebody like a Roman Reigns and maybe launch that into his heel turn. With Toni Storm, she's already as over as can be. She's popular as hell. What does beating Mercedes Mone do for Toni Storm in the long run? And what does that do for the women's division? Because basically, you have sacrificed so many casualties at the expense of Mercedes Mone to get to this point and she's got all these belts. And I know the counter argument to me would be like, well, it could humble Mercedes and maybe give some character development. You might be right in that situation. But again, I keep coming back to this point. What does this do for Mercedes? It creates this final boss, really, of the women's division. And I think that there is a couple of pathways that you can get to a certain point where somebody could beat her and be rewarded. The natural option for me is Willow Nightingale, because Willow's got the history with Mercedes. She beat her in Japan. There's the whole injury history. They're now knotted up 1-1 because Willow won that infamous match in 2023 And then Mercedes got her win back when she won the TBS title from Willow, which I didn't like, but I understood it because it was Mercedes' first match. She wasn't going to lose her first match. Come on. Um, and then the other option, wild card is Chris Statlander. Maybe they could potentially position Megan Bayne into a spot, but Megan just literally lost to Toni Storm. So, what's there really to believe there? The women's division as a whole is really kind of a sham right now. So, if you're going to just spend all this time building up Mercedes to get to this point at All In, only for her to lose to Toni Storm, I don't see how that benefits, really anybody. Because, yeah, you could show some character development for Mercedes and her be humbled by losing the championship. But then what was the point of her collecting all these titles and beating all these women? So like I said, this is why I think that this is such, from a marquee standpoint, I understand why they did it. Because these are two of the biggest stars in women's wrestling, two of the best women's wrestlers bell to bell that you're going to find, and the best character in Toni Storm that there is maybe in all of professional wrestling. You may not like it, but from original creation and stuff, I give AEW, and I also give Toni Storm a ton of credit because she was going nowhere with that rocker gimmick. And then she was kind of cast aside, and then she becomes the outcast, and she made this out of thin fucking air, and it has become one of the best gimmicks in professional wrestling. That being said, I don't think she needs to win this match to validate anything. This woman is the ace of this women's division. Win or lose. She has become a star and doesn't need to be validated at all. I understand that this is the biggest women's match of all time. And people are going to be shocked at me for saying, Mike, you've hammered Mercedes for months and weeks and months on end. You seem like you fucking hate her. Why do you want her to win? I want her to win because I want the payoff to be to somebody who actually needs it to be like that next piece to this women's division. I think it's Willow Nightingale. I do think there's an argument for Chris Statlander. The thing working against Stat is she's lost twice to Mercedes, which is a problem. But, Chris Statlander is so freaking good that, I'd be willing to suspend belief, or I'd be willing to be surprised or, be willing to thrown back into it because she's so great. But really, this should be all about, who's going to be that next star. And really the one to me, and she's been kept away from Mercedes really since that first loss at that Double or Nothing last year, is Willow Nightingale. And she's been embroiled with the Death Riders and everything and all that. That should be who this is about. Don't go for the easy out here and, give it to Toni. All due respect to her, I don't think she needs to win this match. And it may not be a popular decision, but, for me, by a slight margin, the best of two bad options is for Mercedes Mone to win the women's world title, be a double champion, hold 17 titles, because at this point, you've already gone to this length anyway. Why blow it dead? It doesn't make any sense from that logistical perspective. To me, like I said, either way, it's not a good decision. And, maybe the finish of this match, if it ends up being another roll-up, I'll be mad about it in some capacity. But to me, the right option is for Mercedes Mone to win this match and not Toni Storm. That may not be a popular decision in my book because I like Toni Storm. I think she's awesome. But I just don't see any long-term benefit of her winning this match. At least with Mercedes, you can come up with the fringe argument that, hey, you can validate the division with whoever the next person is. Toni, who else is left on the heel side? She's already beaten Megan Bayne. Unless you're bringing, is Tekla? Tekla's already been cast off. Who is it? At least from a babyface side, you've got Willow Nightingale. She's got history with Mercedes. And if I had the pencil, as they say, that's what I'd be building towards. And I think that's what this match should be about. I don't like that this match happened. I don't think it should have happened. I thought it should have been Athena. And Mercedes Mone in this spot, but that's not the case. I thought Toni Storm could have faced Chris Statlander. It could have faced Jamie Hayter, could have faced anybody. And it would have been more validating and it would have made more sense. And then you could have gone to this big women's match and built up to it more and done it in London next year. But they chose not to do that. They wanted to get this out of the way. maybe it's because Mercedes is on a short-term deal and she, hey, want to give her all this mega run and hey, maybe that's what's going on here. We already saw it happen with Mariah May. Why am I not supposed to believe that that's what's going on in real time? Who knows? Anyway, we'll see what happens at All in Texas. I'll have previews of that. I'll have a preview of Saturday night's main event. I'll have a preview of Evolution. Probably won't do anything really heavy for NXT because yes, this NXT show has some stuff on it that's okay, but to be real with you, it feels like it was kind of thrown together at the last minute, and it seems very petty. So they'll probably deliver, but yeah, it's just doing it at the same time as All in Texas when, I've named you the 4 matches that I think are really special matches. The builds may not have been good, but the matches themselves, I think, should be able to deliver, and this should be a great show. But yeah, like I said, I think as much as this may shock everybody in the fan base, man, I think Mercedes should beat Toni Storm at All in Texas and become a double champion. Or what I've lost track of how many championships she has at this point. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Bye-bye.